Alice Bailey was a remarkable woman. She was English, that's remarkable today. She was not well educated, but reasonably well educated. And she had a group, and she supplied them with information she said came from a master, the master DK. She was taken as a leader of esoteric wisdom in the West, not in the Himalayas, in the West, for many years, from 1920-21 until she died in the late 40s. And a lot of what she said was taken in good spirit, and people tried to emulate what she had to say. But you must remember, she was not scientific. If it came to philosophy, yes. If it came to poetry, to art, things like that, yes. What she said was often bang on, which meant that what came from the inner world blended well with what was coming from the outer world. What she did say, I took down. I read her books, all of them, several times, taught what she had to say. She had something to say about the sun. She wrote a book called Initiation, Human and Solar. She wrote the book, A Treatise on Cosmic Fire, and she wrote specifically about the nature of the sun, that structure that I was about to project to. If you were going to a foreign land, you would want to know all about that land you were going to visit, what currency it used, credit cards, geographical layout, so on. Well, I made myself aware of what Bailey was saying about the sun. She needed to say something because she taught a lot about the sun's energy. She said that there was fire by friction, and she was referring to the heat of the sun. She was referring to the light of the sun and the extent of the sun, and on that she referred to the external surface of the sun. And that was fair enough, fire by friction. Then she talked about a second layer, a middle layer, not the outside, fire by friction, but a middle layer called solar fire. She called it solar fire. And this solar fire had all kinds of properties that she related to a human being's soul. She summed it all up in her Psychology of the Seven Rays. And so it employed the concept of the spectrum of the sun, the seven colors given off by the sun, which had their origin way, way out in the universe. And then she talked about the most mysterious and the most difficult aspect of the sun, and that was the central spiritual sun. And she's called it, so far we've had fire by friction, solar fire. Now she talked about electric fire. And all the esoteric people were greatly affected by this, that there was some property at the core of the sun. She couldn't name it, but she gave it her words and called it electric fire. Confusing, yes, but that was what it was. I'm going to show you 3 drawings to depict these fires of Alice Bailey, only to show, if you like, without any lack of respect, how difficult it was for her to name the energies that had given us our origin. Yes, us our origin, humanity its origin, but also its spiritual driving force, as well as its practical everyday experience. She also gave out a second piece of information, which was at the time amazing. She said that all atoms rotated. All atoms rotated. The scientists laughed. Rubbish. Obviously they don't. No one could find any evidence of that. But there was an evidence that came forward that both Professor Scott Olson of Florida University and myself talked about, and that was, it seemed to be, as the basis of quantum mechanics, there seemed to be evidence that atoms didn't rotate in that sense, but they rotated in the sense of half a rotation or 2 rotations. All atoms spin. And the qualities of the minerals, of the elements, are now known to be based mainly upon the spin of the atoms. She had picked this up, but believed spin meant rotation. And it doesn't mean it at all. But there are definitely recognized patterns of movement of the atom, which gives it its qualities. So she came out with that, and I have to now say that Alice Bailey was a great inspiration to me. I bought all her books and read them well and taught out of them. But be careful today. I don't know how many of you read a Bailey book. I know Ted does and refers to them, and I'm sure others do. But be careful that you don't anchor yourself to some of the what could be called scientific observations of Alice Bailey. Her scientific observations were negligible. The reason why I'm bringing this to mention now is because she never made any mention of the sun being a cool body at its core. Not a word. So don't tie everything to, anchor everything to Bailey notion. But she did understand mankind, and she certainly gave very valuable advice to those treading the path, as Joe will tell you and others who have picked up her book subsequently, and they may give you comfort. But to put it in order, she did not know of, or perhaps she knew of but discarded, the well-known esoteric teaching that the sun is a cool body. 3 pictures that I accept as depicting Alice Bailey's notion. Number 1, please. The idea is that at the center of the sun, it was electric. To make a thing electric, you have to take out electrons to make it positive, take electrons out of the atom, positive electricity, but also, and you call these ions then, they become positive ions. And the best example is the hydrogen atom. You take the electron out of it, there's only one, you take it out, it becomes positively electric. So she implied, one of the pictures we have put together of Bailey's contention, notice that there is movement in that picture. And the movement is because hydrogen nuclei have their electrons removed. That's all. And there's movement of them. The second picture, please. She talked about solar fire, the middle layer between the outer heat and light and the central layer, electric fire. And this is the device in the sun, she said, that reflected the qualities, many of them of the soul. And this was the layer that I was able to walk on in a way that we will show you later. And it was the source of the psychology of the seven rays. So that's the second layer of Bailey, describing the sun. Now we'll take the third, electric fire. What is electric fire? It is something contained, Baker maintains, in something like a skin of iron. The skin of iron may be seen as the nucleus of the sun is an iron ball, and within it are hydrogen nuclei, which somehow, and today it's proved by science, can pass through the iron skin. And those hydrogen nuclei, which are positively charged, are able to go through the skin, the iron skin, there it is there, containing them. They form a plasm. Those hydrogen nuclei pass through the iron skin to the surface of the sun, right out, about 800 miles from this central iron ball, which rotates. They pass out through that iron skin to the surface of the sun, where two of them fuse, known as nuclear fusion, and in fusing, two hydrogen nuclei produce light and heat, which are radiated from the surface of the sun. That's all the complication that I'm going to give you. That packs away Bailey. Valid at the time because nothing else was known. But she gave it out courageously, and we followed. And it was a good thing, because now we're going to see what happened when DB, Douglas Baker, went into projection and was able to move through the 93 million miles towards the sun's surface. I was never afraid, and the reason was there was a higher being that assisted me somehow. And in traveling towards the sun, I felt protection, security, lack of fear, knowing, of course, what temperatures science had given the sun at that stage. So there's a drawing. Now look at the surface of the sun, the light and heat. Now you see what I mean when I talk about Alamein. There it is. The external experience of the 1,000 guns going off at Alamein created an orb of such light and such power that when I came through the sun's surface, that was the impression I already had in the brain. It was already there. It wasn't going to flatten my brain. I had the externa at Alamein with 23 miles making up an orb of 1,000 guns going off with the speed of machine guns. So there it was, and approaching the sun, I was aware that solar beings, and we have a picture showing what kind of solar beings there are. And these solar beings were central to columns of fire in this area of the sun. So what was happening was, as I'm trying to explain now, is that hydrogen nuclei without their electron were able to pass through, and we'll see in a moment how modern science has found out this is possible, were passing through the skin, the iron skin of a central structure. And inside the structure were hydrogen plasma, hydrogen nuclei plasma, meaning that they shared each other's boundaries. And according to some force, would pass through the iron skin, there it is, and pass upwards. And as they passed upwards, they entered the tremendous heat and pressure and convection currents of heat drew them onwards and onwards until they came to this outer surface, which was all kinds of temperatures, thousands and thousands of degrees, and fused. And what we need to do on Earth today desperately is to find an industrial method of fusing two hydrogen nuclei without the electrons. And if we can do that, we can produce oodles of heat under control, not causing contamination to the planet. We can irrigate the Sahara by using the nuclear fused heat to convert salt water, and we've got too much of it, and it's growing every year in extent and flooding. We can take the salt water and transmute it into fresh water, and we can grow on the Sahara Desert. And there would be enough space, enough water to irrigate, to cover it in crops that could be eaten. Hunger would be finished. Electricity would be available for massive projects. So that is how the heat and the light is produced. Coming through this structure here, this orb, I found that solar beings were there, and somehow or the other I was surrounded with them for a short period. got to remember this is 1,000,000 miles across from that edge of the sun to this edge. Huge areas, but traveling at pleasantly strong force, current, I was able to pass through the dangerous part of the sun, but not through my own individual capacity, but through what Bailey had called solar angels. And many of you will pass into the solar angel position where the fire element is important, and you are able to live an existence between lives as a solar angel. You might ask what it is in equivalence with humans, and the answer is there are two beings that we describe in esoteric philosophy in our human condition. One is the dweller on the threshold, where anything in your life which has been a threat to you, could be a person, could be a disease, could be a psychological or mental condition, whatever it is, it acts as a dweller and terrifies you or alarms you or reminds you of ancient difficulties. But you stand up to it no matter what it is, knowing that you are treading the path and that there is the opposite of the dweller on the threshold. And it's for you to face. You have to face the challenge of these things that have held you back. And when you do, it's like a question put in the esoteric. If you put a question strongly enough, it's got to be answered. Every question that is strongly enough put and maintained and followed up with, it's going to be answered. That's the significance of questioning. That's the importance of keeping a spiritual diary, is to put questions in the diary, to repeat them audially to yourself or mentally. But sooner or later there will be a question answered. And if you are strong enough to accept the challenges in your life, there will be questions answered that will help you on that path. The dream life will now become investigatable because we are now aware of the fact that there is an astral plane. I've shown you the picture of Scientific American, able to illustrate that the astral world is a reality and that it is huge. And there have been those who have had implicit belief in dreams, out-of-body experience, and I'm referring to Red Indians, who used to believe that you needed to have the dream and live it out in everyday life, and then you will have resolved that particular dream. Dreams figure in most civilizations, recognized at very least. Now science has got a lead, and that is what is so significant. So all these subjects link up, and this is leading us on. Approaching the sun, passing through the outer disk, assisted by angelic hosts and higher beings, and coming through this long period here of about 800,000 miles. The distance between the core of the sun and the flaming hot visual area gets gradually darker. What would stop the heat from burning to a frazzle anything reaching towards this part? The answer is that this is an iron ball, and it's rotating, and the magnetism of it throws back the heat of the disk. And so you could pass, I'm saying, that the future, perhaps a million years from now, the future will allow, somehow or the other, the possibility to get to the cool part of the sun, an inner layer, what Bailey had called solar fire, where quality is the important thing, not the light and not the heat of the disk, that's there. But here it gets darker and darker, and then I was able to walk on this iron disk. How thick? Who knows? Could be 18 inches thick, but it's an iron ball and it contains fusible material, that of hydrogen atoms without their electrons, making them, as it were, electric of Bailey, and they are able to pass through this iron ball out here, and two of them fuse together on the surface of the sun to give light and heat. But there is also a magnetic emission by this rotating iron ball, which holds back the surface of the sun, and the dark matter of the solar system tends to gravitate towards the sun and settle inside the ball, and eventually all of this, in millions of years from now, all of this will have fused, and the solar system will have become dark and cold. And the dark and coldness will be because the dark matter, astral matter, will have taken the place of this. Core of the sun was rotating inside the iron ball, and it was cool, and I was able to walk there. Don't forget I was in my astral body, and Annie Besant always maintained that in your astral body you cannot be maimed by anything physical, and heat is physical. I could tell that as you would experience it naturally, you had to walk upright, and the ball was moving that way for you. A little more effort required than when you were moving downwards on this rotating body. There was, secondly, another important observation I made. One day I was coming back on a troop ship from the Middle East to South Africa. Yes, the Ile-de-France. There were 14,000 of us troops on the ship. Of course, 10-day journey, 12-day journey, everything overloaded. You no sooner finished your meal below decks than you had to queue again somewhere else for the meal that was coming 2 or 3 hours later. Then we got to Durban. We were home. We were back in South Africa. And there were the crowds of families on the quayside expecting their boys back from the Middle East. So many of us crowded on the side of the ship next to the dock that the ship eased over a little. It began to list, thank you very much, began to list towards the dock, and an announcement came over, please walk over, some of you, to the other side of the ship and straighten it. But while this was happening, this listing was occurring, I noticed there was a strange tension on the Ile-de-France, that things that had not been stressed before were being stressed. Things were having tension put on them because the ship was being put into a strained position. It was as if I was on a wooden galleon, and the winds and the gales and the bashing of the waves made the whole ship, the wooden ship, creak and groan. So there was this happening on the sun. Now what it is, I don't know, but I do know this, that it was as if the planets were pulling on the sun. The planets, Uranus, Saturn, and so on, were pulling on the surface of the sun. And it was... and these tensions could be felt on the surface of the sun, giving some sort of throw-out to astrologers that there are tensions affecting the sun itself. So sun square to Mars, or sun trine to Jupiter, or whatever. There are actual tensions on the sun, and I was able to experience those. And then it was over. In a few seconds I was back in bed. But it had told me enough to be emphatic with the scientific authorities, even if they were important magazines like Scientific American and New Scientist, that they had to change their attitude towards the structure of the sun. They'd got it wrong. And the sun basically was cool, and they began to find that dark matter was moving towards the center of the sun. And so it is becoming current scientific teaching that dark matter is conveying a cool nature to a part of the sun, which seems to be the teaching of very ancient times, that the sun is basically a cool body, and only on the reflected surface, where the nuclei of the hydrogen atom fuse, that the heat and light are produced to such an extent that we, 93 million miles away, and all the plants and animals, species on the surface of the earth can profit from that nuclear fusion on the sun. Dark matter, like that, the astral world, forming by nature a circle, in the middle of it is the mental matter materializing into astral matter. That is the esoteric teaching, that mental energy materializes into dark matter or astral matter. So you get a dark ring, and in the center of it there is a vacuum which shows up lightly, making it look as if it's a hole. And that's what science is talking about as being black holes. It's dark matter with mental matter in the middle of it, materializing. I have seen, I have witnessed, I have given testimony, and you can look up Barbanel. Barbanel, who was editor of The Spiritualist, has printed pictures that I witnessed in Cape Town of dark matter being able to enter what is called ectoplasm. The ectoplasm. So it is a domestic expression of this, bringing dark matter into ectoplasm in the world of the astral. You all know what happened 100 years ago. Sir Oliver Lodge, Knight of the Realm of England, the highest regarded scientists, began to experiment with ectoplasm on the earth and found mediums to release ectoplasm. And ectoplasm is physical material coming from a medium's body, able to be entered by dark matter. And we call it materializing mediums. And even though they were the highest scientists in the kingdom, honored with knighthoods, their work was sidestepped. And science went into telescopes and microscopes and split off. Microscopes, oh, well, we've got to have a particle scientist to find the particles. We've got to disregard all this nonsense that women and men, mediums, can produce ectoplasm from the body. There's a piece of it there, healed. An acid burn that I had at Pierian Springs 2 or 3 years ago. And I thought, no, I'm going to try it out. Animals produce it. When they're hurt, they go off into the woods and find a hiding place where they can be on the and lick and lick and lick. And a certain degree of ectoplasm is passed into the wound and helps it wound. Do you see the complications that are arising in this experience? It's not my job to find it. The scientists have got millions at their disposal to be able to employ experts in whatever field, and they're getting nowhere. The real truths lie in esoteric pointers. No, it's not popular. Nor was Sir Oliver Lodge popular, nor was Sir Richard Crooks popular. But they were valid. They were not lying. They were not concocting together and coming up with all sorts of theories. Have a look at the book, This is Spiritualism. Some of the leading journalists of the biggest newspapers in Britain produced pictures of materialization. My own use was that I took ectoplasm, which I had produced in my own body, and in front of people at Pierian Springs, I had rubbed it into this hole. And what interested me in rubbing ectoplasm into a hole made by acid in my hand by an accident was that the scarring is white, like the ectoplasm. It's mixed up with animal saliva when they lick themselves to heal themselves. They crawl away where they can't be interfered with, and they use it to heal them. Can you imagine what our medical profession would have to say about your taking your saliva or somebody else's saliva with ectoplasm in it and rubbing it into a gaping wound to heal it? They'd say you were mad. But there you are. Now you heard a few truths, especially the truths about externa. If you want to get involved, get involved. The things that you could involve yourself in: mineralogy. What do you call turning it into gold?
Alchemy.
Things are released. Joe Hayes, who's here somewhere, and others know we have a file record here of everything that goes on. It's called the Ohm file. And all these sorts of things that I've been talking about are recorded in there very carefully so that they can be extracted in the years to come. Almost anything that you can conceive of has got a recording here in the Esoteric.